Power thrives on fear, on the quiet understanding that those who resist will be crushed, that those who speak out will be silenced, that those who own something valuable will have it taken from them. In one city, a group of men had perfected this game, forcing minority business owners to sell for pennies, using threats and violence to clear the way for their real estate deals. No one had stopped them. No one had dared. When they entered a small grocery store late one evening, they saw nothing but another easy mark. A lone black man, an aging shop, a business just waiting to be taken. They had done this before. A little intimidation, maybe a little blood, and soon the owner would be signing over the deed. What they didn't see was the truth. They didn't see the years of discipline, the instincts honed through war, the quiet strength of a man who had survived far worse than them. They didn't see the grief that had turned into something sharp, unbreakable, ready. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The men who walked into that store thought they were in control. They had no idea they had just started a war. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. Malik Hendricks wiped down the counter, his hands moving with the same discipline he had honed in the Marines. The store smelled of gun oil and old wood, the walls lined with neatly stocked shelves of tactical gear, survival equipment, and firearms. Hendricks' tactical supply wasn't just a business. It was a part of his family's legacy, one he refused to let slip away. His eyes flicked to the framed photo near the register. Aisha, his late wife, smiling at him from a better time. The memory of her voice echoed in his head. This place is more than just a store, Malik. It's a statement, a reminder that we belong here, that we fight for what's ours. He exhaled slowly. Some fights never seemed to end. The bell above the door chimed. 3 men walked in. White, mid-30s, rough-looking but trying to pass themselves off as regular customers. Malik had seen their type before, swaggering in with an attitude that said they thought they owned the world. The tallest one, a wiry guy with a buzz cut, looked around with an exaggerated smirk. Well, well. Didn't know they let just anybody run a place like this. Malik set the rag down. You here to buy something or just waste my time? The second man, heavier, with tattooed arms, ran his fingers over a knife display. Now that you mention it, we are looking to make a deal. The third one, the quietest, lingered near the door. That one was watching. Malik recognized him for what he was, the trigger man. The heavy-set one stepped closer to the counter, resting his hands on the glass. See? We figure a shop like this, a man like you? He grinned. Bet you don't get a lot of protection. Malik didn't blink. What's that supposed to mean? The wiry one laughed, pulling a pistol from his jacket. Means we're taking the register. And whatever's in that safe back there, he waved the gun lazily, like this was just another job for them. Now, don't do anything stupid. We know you don't want to be a hero. Malik's fingers curled under the counter, brushing against the hidden switch beneath the wood. He could smell the arrogance rolling off them, the kind that came from thinking a black man alone in his own store wouldn't be a problem. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The wiry one turned to the heavy-set man. Hurry up and grab! Malik moved first. Before the wiry one could finish his sentence, Malik grabbed his gun hand and twisted hard. Bones cracked, and the pistol tumbled to the floor. The man screamed, but Malik didn't let up. He drove an elbow into the thug's face, sending him staggering into a shelf of tactical vests. The heavy-set one, Earl, lunged forward with a wild swing, but Malik saw it coming. He sidestepped smoothly, catching Earl's wrist and yanking him off balance. A sharp knee to the ribs folded the man over, but he didn't go down. Malik took a step back, breathing steady. He wasn't a young Marine anymore, but he wasn't rusty either. The quiet one by the door, the real threat, was already reaching for his weapon. Malik didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the counter and threw it like a missile. The metal casing smashed into the man's wrist just as he pulled his gun. The shot went wild, shattering a glass display. Earl growled and came back, swinging. Malik ducked, stepped inside his reach, and hooked a fist under his ribs. The man grunted, stumbling back. "Why my store?" Malik asked, his voice even. Earl just laughed, wiping his mouth. "We're making offers." Malik narrowed his eyes. "Don't sound like an offer." The wiry one recovered, his lips split, eyes burning with anger. "It ain't. You're sellin', whether you like it or not." Malik tensed. This wasn't just a random hit. These men came with a purpose. "Not interested." The wiry one spat blood and wiped his mouth. "That's a mistake." He lunged, swinging a wild punch. Malik caught his wrist, twisted, and slammed him face first into the counter. The man groaned in pain. The quiet one had finally recovered. He went for his gun again. Malik had no choice. He kicked a shelf, sending it toppling between them. It bought him seconds. The wiry one took the chance to lunge at him again. Malik turned just in time. Too late to dodge completely. The thug tackled him, driving them both into a wall. Malik gritted his teeth. He could feel the fight shifting. He was good, but he was outnumbered. And these men were willing to kill him. A picture frame fell off the wall beside him. Aisha's face stared up at him from the shattered glass. His jaw tightened. Malik gritted his teeth as the wiry one pressed him against the wall, trying to use his weight to keep him pinned. The man had size, but he wasn't trained. His grip was all force and no technique. Relying on brute strength alone, Malik had fought bigger, stronger men before. He had fought to survive. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. He shifted his stance, planting his feet, then exploded upward with a sharp knee to the wiry one's ribs. The man let out a strangled gasp, his grip faltering just enough for Malik to wrench free. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed the man's arm, twisted hard, and slammed him face first into the counter. A sharp cry of pain echoed through the store, but Malik wasn't done. He grabbed the back of the man's head and drove it into the wood again, knocking him senseless before turning just in time to see Earl barreling toward him. The big man was fast for his size, too fast for Malik to avoid completely. The impact hit like a truck, sending them both crashing into a metal shelf. Tactical bags and gear tumbled down around them, Malik absorbing the worst of it as his back slammed against the hard surface. Earl grinned, grabbing a fistful of Malik's shirt, trying to keep him pinned, but Malik reacted immediately, twisting his body and throwing his legs up in a powerful kick. He caught Earl square in the chest, sending him staggering backward, wheezing as the air was forced from his lungs. Malik scrambled back to his feet, heart pounding, eyes scanning the room for the third man, the quiet one, the real threat. He spotted him just in time, crouched near the counter, scrambling for the pistol he had dropped earlier. Malik didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, kicking the gun away just before the thug could grab it, sending it skidding under a display rack. The quiet one cursed, reaching for a knife instead, but Malik was faster. He grabbed a metal baton from the fallen shelf and swung it with precision, cracking it against the man's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor, the quiet one stumbling back with a pained grunt, cradling his hand. The wiry one groaned from the counter, lifting his head, his face bloodied but still filled with defiance. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" he sneered, spitting blood onto the floor. Malik exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders, feeling the adrenaline keeping him sharp, keeping him on edge. "You came into my store thinking you could take what's mine. I don't quit. I survive." Earl, still struggling to catch his breath, chuckled as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his fingers coming away red. "That's 'cause you still think you got a choice." He took a step forward, cracked his neck, and grinned, his confidence barely shaken despite everything that had just happened. "You don't. You're sellin'. Whether you like it or not." Malik felt his stomach tighten at the words, not out of fear but realization. This wasn't just a robbery. They weren't just here for his money or his inventory. They had come to take the store from him, to send a message, to make an example out of him. The pieces started clicking into place, but there were still too many gaps, still too many questions that needed answers. Earl came at him again, throwing a heavy swing, but Malik had seen it before. He sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him forward before grabbing the back of his head and slamming it into the counter. Glass shattered, fragments spraying across the floor. But Malik didn't stop. He grabbed Earl's arm, twisted it behind his back, and drove a knee into the man's ribs, making him howl in pain. The quiet one was already backing toward the door. Realizing the fight was lost, he hesitated for a second, eyes darting to Earl, to the wiry one slumped on the counter, then to Malik, who stood tall, barely winded, barely bleeding. He wasn't used to fights going like this. He wasn't used to people fighting back. Malik took a slow step toward him, fists still clenched, still ready. "Go ahead," he said, voice steady, daring him. The quiet one made his choice. He bolted. Malik let him go. He turned back to the wiry one, the last man still conscious. The thug coughed, shaking, his face swollen and bruised. But even through the pain, he smirked. Malik grabbed him by the collar, hauling him upright until their faces were inches apart. "Who sent you?" Malik growled, his voice low, sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. The wiry man let out a weak laugh, his busted lip curling. "You really think it matters?" he rasped, wincing with every breath. "You think this ends here?" His eyes flicked to the broken shelves, the shattered counter, the blood smeared across the floor. "You already lost, man. You just don't know it yet." Malik narrowed his eyes, fingers tightening around the man's shirt. He wanted to hit him, wanted to beat the answer out of him, but deep down he knew the truth. This guy was nothing but a messenger. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone else had sent these men. Someone else wanted him out. His grip loosened, and the wiry one slumped to the floor. Malik stepped back, his breathing still controlled, his body still coiled, still ready for another fight. He looked around at the wreckage of his store, at the broken pieces of what he and Aisha had built together. They had walked in here thinking they could take what was his. They had thought he would fold. They were wrong. Malik clenched his fists, jaw tightening as a slow, steady rage built in his chest. If they thought this was over, they had no idea what was coming. He wasn't going to let them push him out. He wasn't going to let them take what was his. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. The sharp wail of sirens cut through the night air, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the shattered storefront. Malik exhaled slowly, his adrenaline fading just enough for him to register the stinging pain along his side. He looked down, saw the dark stain of blood spreading across his shirt, felt the sharp heat of the graze wound he hadn't even noticed. In the chaos, the front door burst open, officers flooding in, weapons drawn, barking commands he barely registered. "Hands where we can see them!" Malik didn't move. He stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, as a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Stand down." Detective Elena Cruz stepped forward, her sharp eyes sweeping the room, taking in the destruction, the unconscious men, the blood, and finally, Malik. She exhaled, shaking her head. "Malik, what the hell did you get yourself into?" Malik sat on the edge of the open ambulance, his shirt pulled up just enough for the paramedic to press a thick gauze pad against his side. The bullet graze stung like hell, but pain had always been easy to ignore. He had been through worse. What wasn't easy to ignore was the sight of his store, his home, wrecked before his eyes. The place he and Aisha had built together was torn apart, shelves knocked over, glass crunching under the boots of officers moving through the scene. This wasn't just a robbery. It wasn't even about money. This had been about control. Detective Elena Cruz stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching him with that familiar mix of frustration and concern. The moment the paramedic finished wrapping the bandage around his ribs and stepped away, she moved in. "You got lucky tonight," she said, her voice edged with restrained anger. "Damn lucky. If that bullet had hit an inch higher, I'd be writing a different kind of report." Malik didn't flinch, his expression unreadable as he glanced down at the white gauze now taped over his side. "I wasn't the one looking for trouble. he said evenly. Elena let out a sharp breath, shaking her head as she looked past him at the destruction. Yeah? Well, trouble sure as hell found you. Malik followed her gaze, taking in the overturned displays, the bullet holes in the walls, the streaks of blood where he had put those men down. This wasn't just about scaring him. They had wanted him to feel powerless. They had wanted him to think he had no way out. They told me I didn't have a choice, he muttered, voice low but firm. Elena scoffed, rubbing a hand over her face before fixing him with a hard stare. Malik, I already got the wiry one. Trey, hauled in. The others will be processed. But let's not kid ourselves. They'll be back on the street before you've had time to replace that glass counter. Malik finally met her eyes. Then I'll be waiting. Elena's jaw tightened, her patience clearly thinning. No? You let me handle this. You do not go looking for a fight. Malik pushed himself up from the edge of the ambulance, rolling his shoulder as if testing how much of the pain was manageable. I don't have to look for it. It already knows where I live. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, the flicker of worry hidden behind her irritation. I know you, Malik. I know how you get when you start chasing things. I've seen how this ends before. Don't make me watch it happen to you. Malik exhaled slowly, taking a second before responding. Then you already know what I'm going to do. Elena ran a hand through her dark hair, clearly exasperated. But she didn't argue. They had known each other too long for that. She just shook her head, letting out a frustrated sigh. Damn it, Malik. He gave her a small, humorless smirk. I know. She didn't stop him as he turned and walked back into what was left of his store. The place was a wreck. But the one thing still intact was his security system. The monitors behind the counter were untouched, the hard drive still running. Malik lowered himself onto the stool, ignoring the way his ribs protested the movement, and pulled up the footage. He scrubbed back to the moment the men had entered, pausing on each of their faces. The wiry one, Trey, the heavy-set one, Earl, and the third man, the quiet one who had run. He studied their movements, the way they had come in confident, sure of themselves, sure that they were in control. They had done this before. This wasn't their first time trying to force someone out. Malik switched to the outside camera, rewinding until something caught his eye. A black SUV parked across the street, engine running. Someone had been watching. He zoomed in, pausing the frame when the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, lingering in the shadows, just barely in the camera's view. He was tall, lean, wearing a suit that didn't match the street thug aesthetic of the men inside. This wasn't some random robbery. Someone with money had sent them. Malik leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. If these guys had been sent to force him out, it meant they had done the same thing to others. He opened a separate window, pulling up local news reports, searching for anything that felt too familiar. It didn't take long before the pattern started to emerge. 3 months ago, a black-owned barbershop had burned down 2 blocks from here. The owner had told reporters he had been getting threats, had been warned to sell, but no one was ever arrested for the arson. 2 months ago, a soul food restaurant had shut its doors without explanation. Word around the neighborhood was that the owner had been jumped in a mugging gone wrong, beaten so badly he had packed up and left town. A few weeks ago, a small grocery store run by a Haitian family had abruptly closed. The owners had disappeared overnight. No word, no warning. Now it was him. Malik's fingers curled into fists as he stared at the screen. This wasn't random. This wasn't about his store. It was about control. Someone was cleaning out black-owned businesses one by one, forcing them out, turning the neighborhood into something else. Someone with real power was pulling the strings. His phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number. Walk away, before it's too late. Malik exhaled slowly, deleting the text without hesitation. They thought they could scare him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, Malik didn't waste time. He spent the early hours knocking on doors, talking to people who had been here long enough to know things. He asked the right questions, listened carefully to the hesitations, the fear in some voices. Some refused to talk, afraid of what might happen if they did. Others spoke in hushed tones, confirming what he already suspected. Every business that had been hit was sitting on prime real estate. Every owner had refused to sell, and every single one of them had been made to change their mind. One way or another. This wasn't just some gang running shakedowns. This was bigger. Malik wasn't just going to find out who was behind it. He was going to stop them. Malik spent the next 2 days working leads, combing through everything he could find on the businesses that had been forced out. He started with what he knew: barbershops, grocery stores, restaurants, black-owned businesses that had been in the community for years, now gone in the span of a few months. It didn't take long before the pattern became undeniable. Every one of those properties had been snatched up within days of the owners closing their doors. The sales weren't publicized, but they were all legal, all perfectly clean on paper. Too clean. He leaned against the counter in his store, laptop open, notes scribbled across a sheet of paper beside him. He cross-referenced every business that had shut down with county property records. The first few sales looked random, different buyers, different transactions, but as he went deeper, he started seeing the same name over and over again. Devlin Holdings. The company was nothing but a shell. No website, no office, no history before a year ago. It had been set up for one reason, and one reason only: to funnel properties into the hands of whoever was really behind this. Someone was using intimidation, violence, and arson to force people to sell, then flipping the properties for pennies on the dollar. Malik clenched his jaw, his marine instincts kicking in. He had seen operations like this before. Corruption running deep, money moving in the shadows, people with power staying just far enough away from the dirt to keep their hands clean. But every operation had a weak point. Every structure had a fault line. He just had to find it. He pulled up Devlin Holdings' official paperwork, scanning the documents for anything useful. The listed CEO was a man named Richard Gable, but that was just another layer of insulation. Gable wasn't the boss. He was a front. Someone else was running the show. And Malik was going to find out who. Meanwhile, Caleb Stokes sat at the back of a dimly lit bar, nursing a whiskey as he listened to his guys try and explain how a simple job had gone so wrong. "It should have been easy," Earl muttered, holding an ice pack to the side of his face. His nose was swollen, one eye half shut from the beating he had taken. "We went in, put a little fear into him, but..." Trey, his lips split, hands wrapped in bandages, shook his head. "Man fought like a damn animal, like he'd been waiting for something like this." Caleb exhaled, annoyed. "You're telling me one store owner put the three of you down?" Earl looked away, but Trey bristled, leaning forward. "We didn't know he was military." Caleb's fingers stilled against his glass. "What?" Trey gestured to the bruises on his arm, shaking his head. "Dude's a Marine. Not just some guy with a shop. He was trained. Tactical." Caleb swore under his breath, setting the glass down hard on the table. He had figured Malik Hendricks was just another stubborn businessman, someone who needed a little pressure to see things the right way. He had done this enough times to know that most people didn't want to fight. They just needed a good enough reason to walk away. But this was a problem. People had to be afraid for things to work the way he needed them to. That was the rule. The moment one person decided they weren't afraid anymore, it spread like a disease. If Malik made it seem like he could fight back and win, others would start thinking they could do the same. That couldn't happen. He pulled a roll of bills from his pocket, tossing it on the table beside him. "Find 2 hitters," he said, his voice low, cold. "Good ones. I want this done quietly." Trey hesitated. "You sure? This guy ain't gonna go down easy." Caleb fixed him with a look that could cut glass. "I don't pay you to ask me twice." Trey nodded, snatching up the money and slipping out of the bar with Earl right behind him. Caleb leaned back in his seat, watching the amber liquid in his glass swirl. Malik Hendricks had made the mistake of thinking he could fight back. Now he was going to learn the cost. Malik sat in his car outside a small tax firm, watching the front entrance. It wasn't the kind of place that stood out, but the name on the door told him everything he needed to know. Gable and Associates. The same Richard Gable listed as the CEO of Devlin Holdings. He was close now, closer than he should be, and the weight of it settled on his chest. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He answered, but didn't speak. A voice on the other end finally broke the silence. "You should have listened." Malik's grip tightened on the wheel. The line went dead. He exhaled slowly, scanning the street around him. Everything looked normal, but normal didn't mean safe. He had been in enough war zones to know when he was being watched. He started the car, pulling into traffic, checking his mirrors every few seconds. A black sedan 2 cars back stayed on his tail, turning when he turned, stopping when he stopped. Malik let them follow for 3 more blocks before making a quick right, cutting through a gas station lot, then pulling into a narrow side street. The black sedan hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Malik to be sure they were following him. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. Instead of driving off, he killed the engine, stepped out of the car, and waited. The black sedan crept forward before rolling to a stop 10 feet away. 2 men stepped out, both of them built like they spent their free time breaking things with their bare hands. One had a knife in his hand, the other reached inside his jacket, going for a gun. Malik didn't wait to see how this was going to play out. He moved. His boot hit the pavement as he rushed forward, closing the distance before the man with the gun could even clear his holster. He grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently, forcing the weapon free before slamming his knee into the guy's gut. The second man came in with the knife, slashing for his ribs, but Malik pivoted, catching the man's arm and using his own momentum against him. The knife clattered to the pavement. Malik wrapped his arm around the man's throat and drove him backward into the car, slamming his head against the window with a thud. The first guy tried to swing at him, but Malik ducked, countering with a sharp elbow to the jaw. The man stumbled, dazed. Malik grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward, slamming him face first into the hood. Both men were down, groaning. Malik grabbed the one with the gun, twisting his arm behind his back and pressing him down harder. "Who sent you?" Malik's voice was low, steady. The man coughed, trying to twist away. "You already know." Malik pressed harder. The man let out a strained laugh. "You're making this worse for yourself." Malik leaned in. "No, I'm making it worse for you." Malik didn't wait for an answer. He had been in too many fights to make the mistake of thinking these men were finished just because they were down. The one beneath him, his arm twisted in Malik's grip, was already shifting his weight, looking for a way to counter. The other, still dazed from getting his head slammed against the car, was finding his footing. Malik acted first. He yanked the pinned man up and shoved him hard into his partner, sending both men stumbling back against the sedan. He took a step back, staying light on his feet, watching them recover. He wasn't underestimating them. These weren't just street thugs throwing sloppy punches. They were trained, experienced, and they had numbers on their side. The first man, broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of size that made most people back off, regained his balance and squared up. He adjusted his stance, recognizing that this wasn't going to be a quick job. The second man, leaner but just as dangerous, wiped blood from his mouth and smirked. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Malik rolled his shoulders, his muscles aching from the earlier scuffle. "Not really." The big one came at him fast, throwing a heavy right hook. Malik barely had time to block, the impact rattling through his forearm as he staggered back a step. The man pressed forward, throwing another punch. Malik ducked, slipping to the side, but before he could counter, the second man was already moving in. A hard strike slammed into Malik's ribs. Pain exploded through his side, forcing him to exhale sharply. Another blow followed, a fast, brutal shot to his shoulder that sent him stumbling. They weren't fighting wild. They were coordinated, keeping him on the defensive, hitting him with precision. Malik steadied himself, shaking off the pain, then exploded forward. He grabbed the smaller man's wrist as he threw another punch, twisting it sharply and forcing him off balance. With his free hand, Malik drove a knee into his gut, knocking the wind out of him. But before he could press the advantage, the big one grabbed him from behind, locking him in a crushing grip. Malik gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure on his ribs. He dropped low, shifting his weight, then shot his head backward. The back of his skull connected with the man's nose. The grip loosened just enough. Malik twisted out, pivoted, and slammed his elbow into the man's jaw. The big one staggered, dazed. Malik turned back just in time to see the smaller one charging again. He barely managed to sidestep, throwing his arm up to block an incoming strike, but the man was fast. A sharp elbow cracked against the side of Malik's head, sending stars across his vision. He stumbled. The big one recovered and took advantage of the opening, throwing a heavy punch straight into Malik's ribs. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, and for the first time, Malik felt the fight slipping out of his control. They were good. They were wearing him down, forcing him to take damage, waiting for the moment when he couldn't fight back anymore. Malik clenched his fists. He let himself fall back, baiting them in. As soon as the smaller one stepped forward, Malik lunged. He caught the man's arm, spun him around, and used his own momentum to slam him into the side of the car. The man grunted, head bouncing off the metal, then collapsed. The big one was already moving, throwing another heavy blow toward Malik's head. Malik ducked at the last second, closing the distance before the man could adjust. He stepped inside his reach, locked his arms around his waist, and drove forward, lifting him off his feet before slamming him down onto the pavement. The impact shook through Malik's bones, but he held on, pinning the man down. The big one thrashed, trying to break free. Malik kept his grip tight, shifting to press his weight onto the man's chest, making it harder for him to breathe. "Who sent you?" Malik growled, his breath coming fast. The man just grinned through the pain. "You're asking the wrong questions." Malik tightened his hold. "Try again." The big man chuckled, even as he struggled beneath him. "You think this ends with us?" Before Malik could press further, he heard movement behind him. The smaller one had recovered. Malik barely turned in time to see the attack coming. A heavy kick caught him in the ribs, sending pain ripping through his side as he rolled off the man he had pinned. He hit the pavement hard, coughing, his body screaming at him to stop, but he pushed himself up immediately. No hesitation, no weakness. The two men regrouped, breathing hard, but still standing. Malik could feel the bruises forming, his ribs aching, his muscles sore. He had taken hits, and he knew this wasn't over yet. They weren't stopping. Neither was he. Malik's lungs burned as he stood over the two battered men, his body aching from the prolonged fight. His ribs throbbed with every breath, his muscles tight with exhaustion. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He had taken their best hits, absorbed their punishment, and was still standing. One of them wasn't getting back up. The smaller one lay sprawled on the ground, groaning, his body barely moving. The big one, however, still had some fight left in him. He rolled onto his side, coughing, his breath ragged but defiant. Malik wiped sweat from his brow and stepped closer, towering over the man. He had seen this kind of stubbornness before. Men who knew they had lost but refused to admit it. "Who sent you?" Malik asked, his voice sharp and controlled. The big man grinned through swollen lips. "You think beating me down changes anything?" Malik didn't respond. He simply crouched beside him, grabbing a fistful of his jacket, yanking him up so their faces were inches apart. The man winced, but the smirk never left his face. "You don't get it," the thug rasped. "This ain't about you. You're just in the way." Malik tightened his grip. "Then tell me who I'm in the way of." The man laughed weakly, shaking his head. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what happens if I talk?" Malik exhaled slowly, keeping his patience in check. He could feel the man's resistance, but he also knew something else. He was afraid. He wasn't afraid of Malik. He was afraid of the people pulling the strings. That was leverage. Malik let go abruptly, letting the man slump back onto the pavement. He wasn't going to scare him into talking, but there was another way. "You've seen what I can do," Malik said, his voice calm, steady. "You walked in here thinking I'd go down easy. That was your mistake." The big man blinked at him, still catching his breath. Malik continued, "But you and I both know I'm not the one you should be afraid of. The people you work for? They sent you here to get rid of me, but they didn't tell you who I was, did they?" The big man said nothing. Malik leaned in slightly. "That means you're disposable. If I let you go, you think they're just going to welcome you back after you failed?" A flicker of doubt crossed the man's bruised face. Malik pressed on. "You tell me what I need to know, and maybe you walk away from this, or you don't, and they decide you're not worth keeping around anymore. Either way, someone's coming for you." The man's breathing grew unsteady. Then, finally, he broke. He let out a long sigh, closing his eyes for a second before opening them again, resignation in his face. "You really want to know?" Malik didn't answer. He just waited. The man swallowed hard, glancing toward his unconscious partner as if debating whether to say it. Then, with a slow breath, he muttered a name. Caleb Stokes. The name meant nothing to Malik. The thug saw the confusion in his eyes and let out a strained chuckle. "You don't know who you're messing with." Malik's jaw tightened. "Then start explaining." The man shifted slightly, grimacing from his injuries. "Caleb runs everything on this side of the city. You think this is just about your little shop? He's got bigger plans. Whole blocks, entire streets. Your place was just one more on the list." Malik's mind worked fast, connecting the dots. The forced sales, the businesses going under, the shell company buying up property. Devlin Holdings. It wasn't just a name on paper. It was Caleb Stokes. He exhaled sharply. He had finally found the man at the top. The thug shook his head, his smirk returning, even through the pain. "You should have just taken the offer, man. Now, you're a problem." Malik stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he stood up and walked away. As he moved toward his car, his mind raced. He had the name, he had the connection. Now, he needed proof. Caleb Stokes wasn't just running some street-level operation. He had influence, power, and the resources to make people disappear. That meant Malik had one shot to take him down, and he wasn't going to waste it. Malik sat alone in his store, the lights dim, the only glow coming from his laptop screen as he sifted through page after page of property records, transaction logs, and business filings. His ribs ached every time he shifted in his seat, a dull reminder of the fight he had survived. The bruises on his knuckles had started to darken, but he barely noticed. His mind was too busy fitting the puzzle pieces together, the frustration in his gut growing as the picture became clearer. Caleb Stokes. The name had weight to it, but not enough. He was a mover, a street-level enforcer with power on the ground, but he wasn't the one pulling the strings. The way these properties were being flipped, the kind of money changing hands, this wasn't some local thug running an extortion racket. There was something bigger behind this, something deeper. And Malik had been in enough war zones to know that the men you saw were never the real power. He needed to go higher. His fingers flew over the keyboard, following the paper trail behind Devlin Holdings, the company that had been buying up the forced-out businesses. Every transaction had a different name attached, a new buyer, a different LLC registered to some faceless entity. It was meant to be confusing. It was meant to keep people from tracing anything back to the real power. But Malik was patient. He was methodical. And after an hour of digging, he started seeing the pattern. Grayson Development Group, Harold Grayson. The man wasn't just rich. He was a kingmaker, the type of developer who turned entire blocks into playgrounds for the wealthy, the kind who spoke about urban renewal while quietly displacing families who had lived there for generations. Malik had seen his name everywhere before, plastered on billboards, listed on sponsorship plaques, mentioned in city council meetings. He had been sold to the public as a visionary, but Malik knew better. He clicked on another link, and a fresh transaction appeared, one that made his stomach tighten. Recent acquisition, 2375 Baker Street, commercial property. Previous owner, Delroy Johnson. Sale price, $8,000. $8,000. That wasn't a sale. That was a robbery. Malik's grip on the mouse tightened as he stared at the number. He knew Delroy. The old man had run his auto shop for decades, had built his business from the ground up, had refused to let anyone bully him into selling. Just last week, he had told Malik flat out that he wasn't going anywhere. And now, overnight, the shop was gone. Malik grabbed his phone and dialed Delroy's number. It rang once, twice. Then, "This number is no longer in service." His stomach dropped. Immediately, he searched for Delroy's home address. He had lived in the same house for over 30 years, not far from the shop. Malik didn't waste time. He grabbed his keys and drove straight there. The house was dark when Malik pulled up to the curb, too dark for early evening. The porch light was off, the blinds drawn tight, the driveway empty. He knocked on the door, no answer. Something wasn't right. He circled around the side, peering through a window. The inside was still furnished. Couches, a coffee table, framed pictures on the walls. But there was no sign of life. A layer of dust had already begun to settle. Delroy was gone. Not moved. Not relocated. Gone. No forwarding address. No moving trucks. No warnings. Malik clenched his fists. This wasn't a buyout. This was an eviction. Forced and final. He took a step back from the window, scanning the quiet street. The neighborhood felt hollow, like it had already been marked for demolition, the soul of it scraped away by people who only saw dollar signs where homes used to be. Whoever was behind this wasn't just buying property. They were clearing the board. Malik turned back to his truck, his mind racing. He had been following the money, but now he was following the bodies. If Delroy had been forced out, that meant whoever was running this operation wasn't waiting around anymore. They were getting rid of anyone who could resist. He needed to find out who was next. Back in his truck, he checked his phone again. He had been tracking Devlin Holdings, but now his focus shifted. Grayson Development Group. Every forced sale, every shady transaction, every piece of land that had been taken over. It all pointed back to Harold Grayson. Malik ran a quick search. Grayson was hosting a charity gala the next night, a room full of the people responsible for gutting his neighborhood, a room full of men who were making the decisions that ruined lives, sipping champagne and shaking hands over expensive dinners, a perfect chance to see who was really pulling the strings. Malik didn't hesitate. He needed to get inside. The Grayson Development Annual Charity Gala was being held at the Peachtree Grand, an upscale hotel in the heart of downtown, the kind of place where deals were made in whispers and fortunes changed with a handshake. Malik wasn't on the guest list, but he wasn't the kind of man who let that stop him. Dressed in a tailored black suit, one of the few things he had kept from his time working private security, he walked through the hotel's main entrance with the kind of confidence that made people assume he belonged. He had picked up a discarded event pass from an empty table in the lounge earlier that evening. He wasn't sure if it would work, but if anyone questioned him, he would deal with it then. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of suits and evening gowns, the air thick with the scent of champagne and expensive perfume. A jazz quartet played softly in the background, and waiters moved between guests, carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all stood Harold Grayson. The man exuded power, not the loud, brash kind that men like Caleb Stokes thrived on, but the quiet, polished arrogance of someone who had never been told no. His graying hair was perfectly combed, his suit worth more than most people's yearly salaries. He moved with ease, shaking hands with men who made real decisions, flashing the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Malik kept his distance, watching. Grayson wasn't just another rich man looking to make money. He was the man controlling Caleb Stokes. Malik didn't leave the gala immediately. He moved through the crowd, listening, watching, taking in every interaction between Grayson and the men around him. This wasn't just a social event. It was a gathering of the people who shaped the city, who pulled the strings from behind polished office doors and conference tables. He made mental notes of who laughed a little too easily at Grayson's jokes, who leaned in when he spoke, and who stood just far enough away to watch without being seen. These were the real players. Then he saw someone he wasn't expecting. Elena Cruz, standing near the bar, dressed in a sleek navy gown that didn't quite fit the casual confidence she carried in the field. She was here for the same reason he was. Malik made his way over, keeping his posture relaxed to avoid drawing attention. "You clean up nice," he murmured as he reached her side. Elena barely glanced at him. "You look like you're about to cause trouble." "Probably," she sighed, taking a slow sip from her drink before setting it down. "You following Grayson?" Malik nodded subtly. "And you?" "Same." She pulled her phone from her clutch, swiped through a few files, then turned the screen toward him. "I've been running background on the businesses that went under. Every time I hit a wall, I found Grayson's name close by." Malik scanned the names listed. Businesses, property records, land transfers. At the bottom, one name stood out. Councilman Richard Moss. Elena tapped the screen. Zoning approvals, business permits. Every single one of these properties got fast-tracked through city paperwork with Moss's signature on it. Malik exhaled slowly. Stokes forces people to sell. Moss clears the legal hurdles. Grayson takes over the land. Exactly. Malik's jaw tightened. "We need to get proof." Elena smirked slightly. "Already ahead of you." She subtly gestured to her bracelet, a discreet, high-quality recorder. Malik let out a breath. Elena continued, "Moss has been talking all night. He's had a few drinks. He likes to brag when he's around the right people." They moved closer to a small group gathered near one of the balcony doors. Moss stood among them, a drink in hand, his voice carrying over the soft music. "It's all about vision," Moss was saying, shaking his head like he was schooling a bunch of amateurs. "These people don't understand. You don't grow a city by sitting on tradition. You grow it by reshaping it." One of the men in the group chuckled. "And Grayson pays you well to make sure that happens." Moss smirked. "Grayson pays for results. The rest just fall in line." Malik and Elena exchanged a glance. Moss took another sip, oblivious to the recording device picking up every word. "You think we got this kind of pull by playing by the rules?" Moss laughed. "Grayson's got the money, I handled the legal end, and Stokes? Well, let's just say he makes sure the paperwork gets signed." Malik clenched his fists. That was it. Elena touched his arm lightly. Not yet. They needed more. Moss kept talking, leaning in slightly, his words slurring now. "The way I see it, these people should be thanking us. We're cleaning up the city, making room for the future. Some of them just don't know what's best for them yet." Malik's stomach churned at the casual way Moss dismissed the lives he was ruining. Elena exhaled slowly. "Is this enough?" "Not yet," Malik muttered. "We need something solid tying Grayson to Stokes directly." She sighed. "Even with this, they'll lawyer their way out of it. We need more." Malik leaned against the bar, thinking fast. Then an idea formed. "Elena, how much heat are you willing to take for this?" She smirked, though there was an edge to it. "You already know the answer." Malik exhaled, pushing back from the counter. "Then we set a trap." Elena raised a brow. "For who?" Malik's expression was cold. "Caleb Stokes." They knew Stokes wouldn't come to them willingly, so they forced his hand. Malik started showing up in his spaces. Bars, betting halls, street corners where Stokes's men operated. He made himself loud, made sure the right people heard him asking questions, dropping Grayson's name in conversations he knew would get back to Stokes. Elena worked the other end, putting pressure on informants, letting rumors spread that Stokes was about to be left out to dry. The response was immediate. By the next night, Malik's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, calm and deliberate. "You want to talk? Come alone." The call ended. Elena, sitting across from him, already had her coat in hand. "We both know you're not going alone." Malik nodded. "Yeah, but they don't." The construction site was dark. The the skeletal frame of an unfinished building looming overhead. Malik stepped out of his truck alone. Elena was hidden nearby, listening. Stokes stood waiting, his arms crossed. 4 men positioned around him. They weren't aiming weapons, but their postures made it clear. This wasn't a negotiation. Didn't think you'd actually show, Stokes smirked. Malik kept walking until he was a few feet away, his stance steady. You and I both knew this was coming, Stokes chuckled. You've been making a lot of noise, Hendricks. Asking a lot of questions. People don't like that. People like Grayson? Malik's response was immediate, cutting through Stokes's attempted intimidation. Stokes's smirk faltered. Malik pressed forward. We have his financials. We know he's been paying you. The only question left is how much you're willing to take the fall for him. Stokes's expression darkened. You think Grayson's got your back? Malik continued. The second this blows up, he's cutting you loose. Stokes clenched his jaw, but he wasn't denying it. You're the one that's disposable, Malik said. Not him, you, Stokes exhaled sharply. And then, he doesn't pay me, Stokes muttered. He pays my crew, pays for the fire damage, for the incidents, for the properties that don't sell right away. Malik didn't react. Stokes kept going, voice bitter now. He makes sure the city never gets in our way. Sends money to Moss to keep zoning approvals running clean. When someone won't sell, they get fined until they don't have a choice. Malik exhaled. Thanks for your time, Stokes. Before Stokes could react, Elena's voice crackled in his earpiece. Got it. We're done. The weight of what Stokes had just admitted settled like a stone in Malik's gut. He had the confession. The proof tying Stokes, Grayson, and Moss together in a tangled web of corruption and violence. But something wasn't sitting right. Stokes had given up too easily, had handed them Grayson's name without the usual hesitation of a man trying to protect himself. He had talked fast, maybe too fast, and Malik recognized the signs. This wasn't a man being backed into a corner. This was a man trying to trade one noose for another. Malik narrowed his eyes, his posture stiffening as he took a slow step forward. The air between them charged with something dangerous. He could hear Elena shift beside him, feel the weight of her stare as she silently watched, waiting to see how far he would take this. He had given Stokes just enough room to lie, and the enforcer had taken the bait without realizing it. You gave that up too quick, Malik muttered, his voice low, controlled, but edged with something sharp enough to cut through steel. He could see the flicker of something in Stokes's face, the brief flash of nerves before the man tried to smother it beneath a forced look of indifference. Malik had spent his life reading people who thought they were untouchable, and he recognized the moment a man realized he had made a mistake. Stokes exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his bruised jaw before shaking his head, his breath coming slightly uneven. Man, you don't even know what you've walked into, he muttered, voice thick with something that almost sounded like regret. But Malik wasn't interested in regrets. He was interested in the truth. Without warning, he grabbed Stokes by the front of his jacket, twisting the fabric in his fists as he yanked him forward, forcing their faces inches apart. The sudden movement knocked the wind from Stokes's lungs, his hands instinctively rising to grab at Malik's wrists, but Malik didn't let go. His grip only tightened, his fingers digging into the material, his body vibrating with restrained violence. I'm done playing games, Malik said, his voice eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made men rethink their choices. You're going to tell me what you're hiding, or I walk away and let you deal with Grayson yourself. That got to him. Stokes went still, his throat bobbing slightly as he swallowed, his mind racing behind wide, calculating eyes. He wasn't afraid of Malik. Not in the way weaker men were afraid of someone stronger. He was afraid of something else. Afraid of what Grayson would do if he talked. But self-preservation was louder than fear. I can give you something bigger, Stokes muttered, his voice dropping lower, almost cautious. Something you really want. Malik's grip tightened. Like what? Stokes licked his split lip, hesitating just long enough to let Malik know that whatever he was about to say was something he had been holding back for a long time. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply and dropped the bombshell. Grayson ordered the hit on your wife. The world stopped. The words hit harder than any punch Malik had ever taken, harder than the worst pain he had endured, harder than the years of loss and unanswered questions. He felt them like a physical force, like a gunshot tearing through his chest, like a blade sliding between his ribs and twisting. Elena inhaled sharply beside him, her posture snapping to full attention. But Malik didn't move. His fingers stayed clenched in Stokes's jacket, his breathing even, his body unnervingly still. The silence stretched too long. Stokes shifted slightly, trying to gauge the reaction, but Malik gave him nothing. No anger, no disbelief, just cold, dangerous silence. "You're lying," Malik finally said, but his voice lacked the conviction of a man who didn't believe it. It sounded more like a man daring Stokes to lie. Stokes shook his head, his expression tightening. "I wish I was." Malik's grip stayed firm, but his breathing had slowed, his mind sharpening in a way that only happened when he was hunting. "Why?" Stokes exhaled through his nose, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. She was asking too many questions. She was digging into things Grayson didn't want her digging into. The land deals, the bribery, the money moving behind closed doors. She started connecting dots no one was supposed to connect. Malik's jaw tightened, a slow, deep rage curling in his chest, something dark and primal that had been buried for years now clawing its way to the surface. So he had her killed. She wasn't supposed to die, Stokes admitted, and Malik could tell by the way he said it that this part was true. Grayson just wanted to scare her off, make her back down. Some threats, some vandalism, maybe shake her up a little. But something went wrong. Malik's voice was dangerously even. "What went wrong?" Stokes hesitated. And that was a mistake. Malik yanked him forward, hard, slamming him back against the crate. The impact made Stokes grunt, his head knocking against the wood, his breath coming out in a short, sharp gasp. "What went wrong?" Stokes's hands lifted slightly, a placating gesture, his voice tight now. She figured out she was being followed. She panicked. She ran. He exhaled sharply. And the guy following her? He wasn't supposed to touch her. But he did. Malik didn't realize his fingers had tightened to the point of pain until he felt his nails digging into his own palms. The worst moment of his life had been orchestrated. His wife, his Aisha, had been taken from him not by chance, not by fate, not by some tragic twist of the universe. She had been murdered. He let go of Stokes so suddenly that the enforcer stumbled, coughing. He straightened, rubbing his throat. But he wasn't smiling anymore. Malik turned to Elena, his voice low, deadly. "Where is Grayson?" Elena hesitated. "Malik, we should—" "Where is he?" Elena sighed, shoulders tense. "Private estate outside the city. No security, just a skeleton crew. He's got money stashed away, probably planning to disappear before this all blows up." Malik nodded once, processing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked. Elena cursed under her breath and followed after him, catching his arm before he could get too far. "Malik, stop and think. We can use this. We can build a case. Take this to Ren. Do it the right way." Malik looked at her, and for the first time she saw the truth in his eyes. "There is no right way," he said, voice calm, cold, absolute. "Not with men like Grayson." Elena exhaled sharply. "You're going to kill him." Malik didn't answer, because she already knew. He climbed into his truck, his movements calculated, final. And when he drove away, he didn't look back. Malik parked his truck 2 miles from the estate, deep in the cover of the woods where the towering pines swallowed the moonlight. The night air was crisp, the damp scent of earth filling his lungs as he stepped out, his boots silent against the forest floor. The estate was built for privacy, hidden behind sprawling acres of dense woodland, but Malik had studied the satellite images before coming. He knew the blind spots, the weak points, the places where security would be thin. Grayson had gone quiet. No press, no public appearances, no movement from his usual haunts. He was already preparing for damage control, stashing away assets, waiting for the storm to pass. But the storm wasn't passing. It was coming for him. Malik moved through the dense woods surrounding Grayson's estate, his body blending into the darkness as he crept closer. The estate loomed ahead, a monstrous display of wealth and power, the kind of place built by men who believed they were untouchable. The property was secluded. No neighbors for miles, just an expanse of land that served as a barrier between Grayson and the consequences of his actions. Malik had no intention of letting that barrier stop him. He had studied the layout, memorized every entry point, calculated every possible scenario. The front entrance was guarded. 2 men stationed near the wrought iron gates, their weapons holstered but visible. Not professionals, just hired muscle meant to intimidate. They weren't expecting a fight. Malik didn't give them the chance to start one. He moved fast, low to the ground, his approach silent. The first man barely had time to react before Malik's arm snapped around his throat, cutting off his air supply. The second man turned, reaching for his weapon, but Malik struck first, his elbow crashing into the man's ribs with enough force to send him reeling. Before the guard could recover, Malik grabbed the back of his head and drove it into the metal gate, the sickening crack of bone against iron echoing into the night. The man slumped to the ground, unconscious. Malik eased the first guard's limp body down, checking the perimeter before slipping inside. Grayson had spared no expense in fortifying his home. Floodlights swept across the courtyard, their glow revealing a pristine stone pathway leading up to the massive front doors. But Malik wasn't walking through the front like a guest. He moved along the shadows, circling the side of the house where the security was thinner. A balcony on the second floor overlooked the garden, its glass doors partially open to let in the night air. An oversight. Malik scaled the stone wall, his grip firm, his muscles straining as he climbed. He reached the edge of the balcony, hoisted himself up, and slipped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. He stepped onto the marble floors, his breath steady, his mind focused. The air smelled of expensive cigars and aged whiskey, the scent of a man who believed himself above consequences. Malik moved deeper inside. A faint murmur of voices drifted from the study down the hall. Grayson was here. Malik approached, his movements calculated, his pulse steady. He reached the doorway, pausing just long enough to listen. "Handled it," Grayson was saying, his voice smooth, unbothered. "Moss is finished, and Stokes knows better than to cross me." Another voice, wary. "And Hendricks?" Grayson scoffed. "A grieving widow's temper tantrum. He thinks this is about revenge. That's the problem with men like him. They always assume it's personal." Malik stepped inside. Grayson froze mid-sentence, his glass of whiskey hovering in his hand. His companion, a man in a tailored suit, immediately went for his gun, but Malik was already moving. The gun barely cleared the holster before Malik's fist crashed into his jaw, sending him sprawling across the desk. The weapon skidded across the polished wood, out of reach. Malik didn't break stride. Grayson exhaled through his nose, setting his whiskey down carefully, as if he weren't watching his associate groaning in pain on the floor. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Grayson said, his voice calm, unshaken. Malik didn't waste words. He closed the distance in a blink, grabbing Grayson by the collar and slamming him into the bookshelf. The shelves rattled, books tumbling to the floor as the older man gasped, his hands grabbing at Malik's wrists in a futile attempt to break free. "You had her killed," Malik said, his voice low, dangerous. Grayson coughed, but still had the audacity to smirk. "She had a choice. She could have walked away, let things be. But no, she kept digging, kept pushing. And when someone refuses to listen," his lips curled slightly, "they become an obstacle." Malik moved. His grip tightened around Grayson's throat, lifting him off the ground before slamming him back against the shelf, harder this time. The sound of glass shattering, wood splintering, filled the room as Grayson choked, his smirk finally breaking, his arrogance crumbling beneath real fear. Grayson gasped. "You took everything from me," Malik snarled, "and yet, here you are. Still alive." Grayson wheezed. Malik's fist crashed into his ribs. Grayson crumpled forward with a strangled cough, spitting blood onto the polished floor. His hands trembled as he braced himself against the desk, his composure shattering. Malik grabbed him again, dragging him upright, and threw him across the room. Grayson stumbled, his back slamming against the liquor cabinet, the bottles shaking violently before one crashed to the floor. The amber liquid spread across the tile, seeping into the cracks like blood. A loud click cut through the tension. Malik turned just in time to see Grayson pulling a small pistol from his desk drawer. Grayson fired. Malik twisted his body at the last second, the bullet grazing his shoulder instead of burying into his chest. The pain was immediate, searing, sharp, but Malik had taken worse. He closed the distance before Grayson could fire again. His hand snapped around Grayson's wrist, twisting the gun out of his grip before driving his knee into the older man's gut. Grayson doubled over with a ragged gasp, his body folding, his breath a wheezing mess of pain. Malik didn't let him fall. He grabbed him by the hair, yanking his head up so their eyes met. "You killed her," Malik said, his voice rough, his breath heavy. Grayson's mouth opened, gasping for air, but no words came. Malik's fist slammed into his jaw, the impact sending Grayson crashing onto the desk, knocking papers and glass across the floor. Grayson groaned, his body convulsing slightly, his breath coming in short, desperate bursts. Malik wiped the blood from his lip, his eyes cold, his chest heaving. This was the man who had taken everything from him. And now he was nothing. Malik picked up the gun from the floor, flipping it in his hand, the weight of the weapon solid against his palm. Grayson turned onto his back, his swollen face twisted in panic. You don't have to do this." Malik stared down at him, his expression unreadable. Grayson's wheezing breaths filled the room, his hands pressing against the desk for support as he tried to push himself up. His confidence had cracked, but it hadn't shattered completely. Not yet. Malik could see it in his eyes, that last ember of defiance, the belief that money and power would still save him. Then the reinforcements arrived. Malik barely had a second to react before the door behind him exploded open, heavy boots thudding against the floor. A force slammed into his side, sending him staggering into the bookshelf. Pain flared in his ribs, the bruises from earlier fights throbbing under the fresh impact. He turned just as a fist crashed into his jaw, snapping his head to the side. He caught himself before he fell, twisting away from the next strike, his vision sharpening through the haze of pain. 3 men, bigger than the last ones, more aggressive, more prepared. Grayson had come ready for a worst-case scenario. Malik's instincts kicked in immediately. No wasted movements, no hesitation. He pivoted, dodging a second punch, then drove a hard elbow into the nearest attacker's sternum, feeling the breath rush out of the man's lungs. But the second one was already on him. A knee slammed into Malik's gut, forcing a grunt from his throat. He twisted with the hit, using the momentum to grab the attacker's arm and yank him forward, slamming his face into the edge of the desk. Blood splattered across the polished wood. But Malik didn't stop. He grabbed the man by the collar and threw him into the bookshelf, sending books tumbling down in an avalanche of hard covers and broken wood. The third man came from behind, wrapping a thick arm around Malik's neck, a chokehold. Fast, tight, dangerous. Malik reacted immediately, tucking his chin, twisting his body, shifting his weight. The man tightened his grip, trying to cut off Malik's air completely. But Malik planted his foot, bent his knees, and launched himself backward. Both men crashed into the liquor cabinet, glass shattering around them. Malik used the impact to slip free, twisting at the last second and slamming his elbow into the man's ribs. The attacker let out a strained grunt, but he didn't drop. Instead, he came back swinging, a brutal right hook aimed at Malik's temple. Malik barely ducked in time, feeling the wind of the missed hit whip past his face. The second strike came even faster. He blocked it with his forearm, countered with a sharp knee to the kidney, then a heavy hammer fist down on the back of the man's neck. The man stumbled, but he didn't fall. He was tough, used to pain. Fine. Malik would just have to break him down the hard way. The first attacker was back on his feet, shaking off the daze. Malik didn't give him the chance to recover. He surged forward, caught the man's wrist, twisted, broke the hold with a sharp downward strike, then grabbed his head and smashed it into the desk a second time. The sickening crack of cartilage breaking filled the air, and the man went limp, finally staying down. 2 left. Malik turned just in time to see the second attacker charging at him. Too fast to dodge completely. Malik braced himself just before the impact drove him backward, sending both of them tumbling over the desk, crashing onto the floor. They hit hard. Malik rolled, but the attacker rolled with him, throwing a hard elbow into his side, targeting the spot where the knife had grazed him earlier. Pain shot through Malik's body, sharp and deep, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to move, to ignore it. The attacker pinned him, one knee pressing into Malik's ribs, a fist raised to strike. Malik didn't let it come down. He grabbed the man's wrist, yanked it sideways, dislocating the shoulder with a sharp pop. The scream was immediate, the attacker's body jerking in pain. But Malik wasn't done. He hooked his legs around the man's torso and twisted, flipping them over. Now he was on top. Malik drove his fists down, fast and hard, landing 3 solid blows, 1 to the nose, 1 to the jaw, 1 to the temple. The attacker's body went slack beneath him. 1 left. Malik barely had time to stand before the last attacker came at him, swinging wild but strong. Malik caught the hit, countered with a short jab, but the man tanked it, grabbing Malik's arm and twisting it behind his back. The hold was tight, painful. Malik felt his shoulder strain, the tendons screaming under the pressure. The man yanked harder, trying to dislocate it. Malik reacted on instinct. He launched his head backward, the back of his skull smashing into the attacker's nose. The grip loosened for just a second, all Malik needed. He spun out, grabbed the man by the throat, and lifted him slightly before slamming him onto the ground. The man gasped, struggling, but Malik didn't stop. He dropped down, drove his knee into the man's chest, pinning him, then rained down heavy strikes, 1, 2, 3, until the body beneath him stopped fighting. The room was quiet again. Malik sat back on his heels, his breathing heavy, ragged. His side burned, his ribs ached, and his lip was split and bleeding. But he was still moving, still standing, and Grayson was still here. Malik turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto the man who had destroyed his life. Grayson stood frozen, his body pressed against the farthest wall, his face pale. He had seen the entire thing. Malik forced himself to his feet, every muscle in his body protesting, but he didn't care. He wasn't done yet. He stalked forward, slow, deliberate, each step making Grayson press further against the wall like a trapped animal. "Please," Grayson wheezed, his voice cracking. Malik kept walking. Grayson swallowed, his fingers shaking as he reached for something on the table behind him. A letter opener. Small, pathetic, useless. Malik swatted it out of his hand like an afterthought. Then he grabbed Grayson by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Grayson gasped. Malik leaned in close, his voice a whisper of cold steel. "You don't get to beg." Grayson's breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps as Malik pressed him against the wall, the weight of his grip pinning him like a vice. His once pristine suit was torn, stained with sweat and blood, his carefully combed hair disheveled. The fear in his eyes was real now, raw and unfiltered. Malik's own breath was labored, his body screaming from the punishment it had endured. His ribs throbbed, his shoulder burned from the strain of the last fight, and blood dripped from the gash on his lip. But he ignored the pain, his focus unshaken. Grayson had nowhere left to run. Yet, he wasn't done fighting. In a last desperate attempt, Grayson drove his knee upward, aiming for Malik's injured ribs. The strike connected, and pain exploded through Malik's side like fire. His grip loosened just slightly, just enough for Grayson to rip himself free. Grayson stumbled back, gasping, but he didn't try to run. He knew he wouldn't get far. Instead, his hands darted for the shattered remains of his desk, grabbing a jagged shard of broken glass. He lunged. Malik twisted, barely dodging the first wild swing, the jagged edge missing his throat by inches. Grayson was panicked, sloppy, but desperate men were unpredictable. He slashed again, this time catching Malik's forearm, the glass cutting deep. Pain flared, but Malik gritted his teeth and stepped in. Grayson swung again, but Malik caught his wrist mid-air, twisting with bone-crushing force. The older man let out a strangled yelp as his fingers spasmed, the shard slipping from his grip. Before he could react, Malik drove his elbow into Grayson's sternum, sending him crashing back against the bookshelf. Grayson coughed violently, clutching his chest. His legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees, his body finally giving out. Malik stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. He could end it right now. A single strike, a snapped neck, and it would all be over. But Grayson deserved worse. Malik stepped back, wiping the blood from his mouth, his expression unreadable. "You don't get to die quick," he muttered. Grayson's head snapped up, his face contorted in rage and exhaustion. "Then what the hell do you want?" he gasped. Malik exhaled slowly. "I want you to talk." Grayson's lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smirk, but there was no confidence left in him. "You think I'll just hand you everything?" he rasped. Malik crouched down, his eyes locking onto Grayson's. "You don't have a choice." Grayson let out a shaky breath, his fingers curling weakly into fists. "You talk," Malik said, his voice cold, calculated. "You confess, on record. You give me names, bank records, every piece of evidence tying you to Moss, Stokes, and everyone else who's been buying this city." His gaze darkened. "Or you pray that I let you keep breathing." Grayson's breath hitched. Then he let out a low, bitter laugh. "You don't scare me," he muttered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Malik pulled out his phone, flipping open the voice recorder. He pressed record. "You want to test that?" Malik murmured. Grayson hesitated, his mind racing. He still thought he could negotiate, still thought there was a way out. But there wasn't. Not this time. His fingers trembled as he ran them through his blood-matted hair, his body shaking from pain and exhaustion. Malik could see the shift happening. The moment the realization sank in, he had lost. Grayson swallowed hard, then exhaled. "I ran the operation," he muttered. Malik didn't move. "Louder!" Grayson's jaw tensed, but his voice came stronger this time. "I ran the operation. The real estate scams, the intimidation, the payoffs." He coughed, his ribs aching. "I paid city officials to look the other way. I had men like Stokes and his crew handle the dirty work, burning businesses, threatening families. If someone didn't sell, we made sure they couldn't afford to stay." Malik's fingers tightened around the phone. Grayson licked his lips, his breathing still shaky. He wasn't done. "Aisha Hendricks was looking into it," he continued, his voice flat, hollow. "She was getting too close. She had started making the connections, following the money. If she published what she had, it would have all fallen apart." Malik's chest burned. He had known the truth, but hearing it like this, from Grayson's own mouth, it ignited something dangerous inside him. "She wasn't supposed to die," Grayson admitted, his voice quieter now. "I ordered Stokes to scare her, to send a message. But he hired an idiot, someone who panicked, someone who took it too far." Malik felt his entire body tense. Grayson let out another breath. "By the time I realized what happened, it was too late. So I cleaned it up. paid off the cops, made sure the accident report never led back to me. Malik's vision blurred with rage. This man had destroyed everything. He had ordered Aisha's death like it was a minor inconvenience, a simple adjustment to his empire. And now, he was finally admitting it. Grayson let out a bitter chuckle, though it came out more like a wheeze. So, there you go. You have your confession. He let his head slump back against the bookshelf, completely spent. What now? Malik stood, his breath steadying, his fingers gripping the phone so tightly it nearly cracked. He looked down at the broken man in front of him, the man who had taken his world, his peace, his wife. He could end it, right here. Grayson knew it too. Malik saw it in his eyes, the expectation. But Malik had already made his choice. He pocketed the phone. Then he turned away. Grayson's brow furrowed in confusion, but Malik didn't look at him. He grabbed the nearest chair, positioned it in front of Grayson, and sat down. "You're going to give me the rest," Malik said. Grayson blinked. "What?" Malik leaned forward, his hands clasped, his eyes filled with something cold. "You're going to tell me where the money is, where the documents are? Every paper trail, every off-the-books transaction. You're going to name everyone involved." Grayson shook his head, his breath uneven. "You think I'm just going to hand it over?" Malik's voice didn't waver. "Yes, because you know what happens if you don't." Grayson swallowed hard, and then he started talking. The confession had been long, meticulous, and damning. Malik had forced Grayson to talk for nearly an hour, dragging out every name, every transaction, every dirty deal. He had pressed for details: who had been paid off, how the money had moved, what documents still existed. Grayson had fought it at first, clinging to his arrogance, but the more he bled, the more he talked. By the end, he was trembling, his once smooth voice reduced to a hoarse whisper, his body slumped against the wall like a discarded puppet. Malik had gotten everything. He hadn't planned on leaving Grayson in one piece, but in the end, this was the better punishment. Grayson would live just long enough to watch his entire world collapse. Malik stepped back, rolling his aching shoulder, his knuckles raw from the fight. Blood, his and theirs, covered the floor in thick smears. The house, once pristine and controlled, was now a wreck. Grayson sat where he had fallen, his head tilted slightly, his lip busted and bleeding, his expression caught between hatred and exhaustion. Malik pulled out his phone again. One call. Elena picked up on the first ring. "You got it?" she asked, her voice tense. Malik exhaled slowly. "Yeah." A beat of silence. Then, "Sit tight. We're coming." The call ended. Malik pocketed the phone, looking down at Grayson. "Showtime." Grayson let out a bitter laugh, though it barely had any sound left in it. "You think this matters? You think they'll keep me in a cage?" His eyes were red-rimmed, wild. "I own this city." Malik didn't flinch. Not anymore. The sound of sirens broke the silence. Malik heard them before Grayson did. The distant wail of police cruisers, the distinct chop of a news helicopter cutting through the sky. Grayson's smirk faltered, just slightly. Malik watched him realize. Elena hadn't just brought the cops. She had brought the world. Grayson's head snapped toward the window, just as the flashing red and blue lights filled the front courtyard. Malik heard the tires screech, the slamming of car doors, the sharp commands of armed officers moving in formation. Then, a loud, commanding voice through a megaphone. "This is the police! Put your hands in the air and come out slowly." Grayson let out a strangled breath, his fingers twitching against his lap. For the first time, he looked truly lost. "You set me up," he muttered, almost in disbelief. Malik's jaw tightened. "You set yourself up." A heavy knock pounded against the front door. "Elena Cruz, FBI, open up." Malik took a slow step back, his body finally acknowledging the full weight of the fight. His ribs throbbed, his arm burned from the gash, and his muscles ached from the repeated blows. But he was still standing. Grayson wasn't. A loud crash filled the house as officers breached the front entrance. A team of SWAT officers flooded in, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the carnage. They moved efficiently, one securing the hall, another sweeping the study, two more locking onto Grayson. "Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them." Grayson hesitated for just a second, his fingers clenching into fists, his body coiled with pure, useless rage. Then he did the only thing he could. He raised his hands. Two officers rushed him, forcing him onto his stomach, his face pressing against the blood-streaked floor. Malik watched as they cuffed him, twisting his arms behind his back, yanking him to his feet. Grayson snarled, but there was no power left in it. Elena appeared moments later, stepping through the chaos, her sharp gaze sweeping over the room. Her eyes locked onto Malik immediately, scanning his injuries, taking in the destruction left in his wake. "Jesus, Malik!" He wiped a line of blood from his mouth. "You should see the other guys." Elena let out a slow breath, then turned toward Grayson. Her face hardened. "Harold Grayson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, extortion, bribery, and accessory to murder," she recited smoothly. Her voice carried through the house, through the open door, where cameras had begun flashing. Grayson turned his head slightly, finally noticing the press outside. The realization hit him like a bullet. He wasn't just going to prison. He was being exposed. The city would see. His people would see. His empire was crumbling right in front of him. "This won't hold," he growled. But the desperation was there now. Elena just smiled. "I think it will." The officers started moving him toward the door, dragging him forward, past the wreckage of his own kingdom. His breaths were sharp, his body stiff, his wrists raw from the cuffs. Malik followed them out, stepping onto the grand stone steps of the estate. A flood of flashing lights greeted them. News vans lined the driveway, cameras rolling, journalists pushing forward, shouting questions. Grayson flinched, his ruined face caught in every frame. Malik stood beside Elena, watching the scene unfold. It was over. The empire had fallen, and the world would never forget it. Elena turned toward him, her expression softer now. "You okay?" Malik exhaled, feeling the exhaustion creep in, but he nodded. He had done what he came to do. He glanced at the flashing cameras, then back at Grayson being stuffed into the back of a police car. For the first time in years, Malik Hendricks felt like he could finally breathe. The days that followed were a whirlwind of arrests, courtroom hearings, and televised coverage of one of the most explosive corruption scandals in the city's history. Malik watched from a distance as the empire that had stolen so much from him crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. Grayson had been the first to fall, his desperate attempts to backtrack, deny, or downplay his role rendered useless by his own recorded confession. No amount of legal maneuvering could undo the damning words that had left his mouth when he believed he had nothing left to lose. The state moved quickly, filing charges of fraud, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The media swarmed every courthouse step, every high-rise law firm Grayson had once owned, every property he had built with stolen land and blood money. He was finished. Malik didn't feel satisfaction watching him paraded in handcuffs, head lowered, his once impenetrable arrogance shattered under the weight of reality. He didn't feel rage or grief or even relief. He only felt done. The fight had taken everything out of him, left scars both visible and buried deep. And now that it was over, he wasn't sure what was left of him. But Grayson wasn't the only one paying for his sins. The domino effect was immediate. The city officials who had signed off on fraudulent land acquisitions, accepted bribes to look the other way, and buried reports of illegal business deals were the next to go down. Councilman Moss was among the first to be indicted. His name splashed across every newspaper. His career eviscerated in less than a week. By the time he was brought in for questioning, his fellow conspirators were already flipping on him, throwing his name into the tangled mess of corruption that stretched far beyond even Grayson's influence. Malik had expected a long legal battle, months of bureaucratic delays and hidden loopholes that would keep these men from facing real consequences. But he had underestimated how quickly a system would turn on its own when self-preservation was at stake. The city didn't want justice. It wanted distance. The mayor's office issued immediate statements condemning everyone involved, ensuring the public that reforms were already underway, that safeguards would be put in place, that something like this would never happen again. It was a lie, of course. Malik had seen too much to believe otherwise. But it didn't matter, because this time, the people responsible weren't getting away. Caleb Stokes, after his pathetic attempt to flee the country had been cut short by the feds, had done the only thing a man in his position could do. He turned on Grayson. The moment he realized that Grayson's political allies wouldn't be able to protect him anymore, that his network had collapsed, that his power had been nothing more than borrowed influence, he cut a deal. Malik hadn't planned on working with him. He hadn't planned on offering him anything but the same fate as the others, but Elena had convinced him that using Stokes to get to Grayson was the smarter move. And it had worked. With Stokes's cooperation, the case against Grayson became airtight, the final nail in the coffin of a man who had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable. The deal Stokes had made with the prosecutors earned him a reduced sentence, a decision that Malik had struggled with more than he liked to admit. The man had been responsible for so much. He had sent his men to terrorize business owners, burn down stores, force families out of their homes, and worse. He had personally overseen the intimidation of dozens of people, had made it his career to enforce the will of men like Grayson, and had done it without hesitation. But he hadn't pulled the trigger on Aisha. That was the only thing keeping Malik from tearing him apart when Elena had first told him about the deal. Instead of a lifetime behind bars, Stokes would serve 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole if he continued cooperating with authorities on other cases related to the corruption ring. It wasn't the justice Malik wanted, but it was the justice he had to accept. He hadn't gone to Stokes's sentencing. He hadn't wanted to hear the excuses, the justifications, the half-hearted regret of a man who had spent his entire life breaking others down. But he had read the reports afterward. Stokes had stood before the judge, for once, without the swagger of a man who thought he was invincible. He had admitted his role, had named names, had given everything Malik had fought for. He had also requested protective custody. Malik wasn't surprised. Without Grayson's network shielding him, Stokes wasn't going to last long in general population. And Malik? He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that the case was closed. The evidence was irrefutable. The arrests were final. The city was forced to acknowledge what had been hidden for so long. Justice had been served. But for Malik, the battle wasn't just about taking them down. It was about what came next. Elena had found him at his shop later that week, the place still standing despite the damage, still his despite everything Grayson had tried to take. She had watched him for a long moment, taking in the man who had spent years chasing ghosts and vengeance, now standing in the aftermath of a war he had finally won. "You did it," she had said. Malik had barely reacted. "Yeah, you don't seem happy about it," he had exhaled, his fingers running absently over the counter, the weight of exhaustion still pressing on his bones. "It doesn't change what happened." Elena had studied him carefully. "No, but it stops it from happening again." He hadn't answered right away. She had reached into her pocket and slid an envelope across the counter. Malik had stared at it for a moment before picking it up, his fingers rough against the smooth paper. "A thank you from the city," Elena had explained. Malik had opened it, unfolding a formal letter stamped with the mayor's seal. Recognition, compensation, an offer, a position. One that would allow him to continue the fight, to be part of rebuilding what had been torn down. It was a way to move forward, to turn everything he had done into something more. He had let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "They think I want to be a politician now?" Elena had grinned. "Not exactly. But you can't just keep fixing shelves forever, Malik. He had looked down at the letter, reading the words carefully, feeling the weight of it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Malik wasn't standing at the edge of a battlefield. There was no next fight waiting for him, no enemy lurking in the shadows, no war demanding his attention. He had spent years chasing ghosts, unraveling conspiracies, and dismantling the rot that had stolen everything from him. Now, the war was over, and for the first time, he was left with something unfamiliar. A choice that wasn't about survival or revenge, but about what came after. Not a battle to prepare for, not an enemy to hunt, just a life waiting to be lived. Elena watched him for a moment longer, her sharp gaze softening just slightly. She had seen him at his worst, had fought alongside him when the world had tried to break him, and now she was giving him what no one else had ever been able to, the space to decide what came next on his own terms. She tapped the counter lightly, a silent punctuation to everything that had been said and unsaid between them. "Take your time," she said, her voice quiet, steady, and then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of his decision. The store was quiet again, the distant hum of the city filtering in through the windows, the same city that had taken so much from him but had never been able to take his resolve. Malik exhaled slowly, running his fingers over the letter Elena had left. Feeling the embossed seal against his calloused hands, he let his gaze drift upward, toward the small framed photo that sat behind the counter. Aisha's face stared back at him, frozen in time, her eyes still filled with the quiet determination that had made him fall in love with her. She had fought for the truth, had risked everything to expose men like Grayson, and in the end, she had paid the price for her courage. But she had never run, never backed down, never let fear dictate her choices. Malik had spent so long fighting for justice, for vengeance, for retribution, but he knew now that wasn't what Aisha would have wanted for him. She had always believed in building something better, in fixing what was broken instead of just tearing down what was corrupt. He set the letter down carefully, smoothing out the edges, then looked at the store around him, the place he had once thought would be his final stand. Now nothing more than a reminder of the life he had put on hold. Maybe it was time to start again, not just for her, but for himself. Malik let out a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and turned toward the door. Whatever came next, he was finally ready. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.